Are you ready for another one today? So today we're going to be talking about the farcical nature of the novel foods regulation. It's a crisis at the minute for herbalists because the Food Standards Agency has started to come after small businesses and herbalists across the UK and the EU. It's a pan-European problem that is particularly acute here in Northern Ireland. What started as a well-intentioned policy to protect public health has become a bureaucratic, exclusionary, and prohibitively expensive barrier, one that favors, unsurprisingly, big business and penalizes tradition, innovation, and personal autonomy. Now, what is the Novel Foods Regulation and why was it created? The EU came up with the regulation in 1997, aiming to ensure that genuinely new foods or ingredients, so think GMOs or synthetic additives or exotic imports, that these were properly assessed for safety before hitting supermarket shelves. The principle is that if it wasn't a food significantly consumed in the EU before May 1997, then it was novel and it had to undergo a rigorous centralized approval process. Now, on paper, this was about consumer safety and harmonizing standards across Europe. But in reality, the regulation's definition of novel is so broad that it sweeps up a vast range of traditional foods, herbs, and botanicals, regardless of their long history of use elsewhere. Now, there are eye-watering costs of compliance to this, because the financial and the administrative burden of getting the product through the novel foods approval process can cost anywhere between £200,000 to £400,000. That's about €300,000 to €500,000. The dossier preparation has to include toxicological studies, detailed compositional analysis, and legal or consultancy fees. The scientific studies need to satisfy regulators, and they're often required to commission new toxicological research, even for substances that have been used for centuries. Now, these studies alone can cost £100,000 to £250,000 per ingredient. Navigating the process requires special consultants and legal advice, so they're making money out of this, adding tens of thousands of pounds more to a bill. Now, getting it to market, the process can take anywhere between 18 and 36 months, during which time product cannot be legally sold or marketed. Now, just raising a mirror to the organizations that are involved in this and the MHRA and medicines licensing, they were able to put COVID vaccination without any rational testing into people's within 3 to 4 months. It's taking us to use a herb 3 years. You can tell I'm getting a little bit peeved. So for context, a small herbalist, if they're lucky, or a small producer might have an annual turnover of about £50,000 to £150,000, and the cost of the novel foods approval for just one ingredient could easily exceed their entire yearly revenue, never mind the dozens of botanicals that might be involved in their practice. Who can afford it? Only big business, and the costs are trivial if you're a multinational corporation, but utterly insurmountable for a small business or a community herbalist. And as for independent producers, their entire business is at risk. The result is that only the biggest players can afford to bring novel products to market, whilst everyone else is locked out. And it's not just a barrier to entry, it's a deliberate narrowing of choice, of diversity, and of innovation. Now, we are using traditional remedies. They are being banned as we speak, and they are after us. So botanicals that we have been using in practice, for tens of years, and that the Chinese have been using for hundreds, if not thousands of years, include cordyceps, reishi mushroom, lion's mane, ashwagandha, and even some of the familiar foods like chia seeds and baobab, depending on how it's extracted. And they've been caught up in this regulation. And unless somebody is willing to pay a six-figure sum for the approval, then these products are effectively banned from sale. Innovation is being suppressed. New blends, new extracts, new preparations, even those based on traditional knowledge, are off limits unless they go through the same costly process. Now, it means that your public health is being undermined because things like turkey tail, which we are using for cancer really, really effectively, are now being taken off the market. Cordyceps, which has been great for long COVID and for convalescence, is also being removed, particularly certain types of cordyceps. Consumers are going to lose access to safe, evidence-based botanicals and supplements, while ultra-processed foods such as crisps, chocolate, anything that's brought with plastic packaging that you're putting in your microwave, which is killing you, and the new and synthetic additives that we're putting into this are getting fewer hurdles than the herbs are. Now, we're in Northern Ireland, and the regulatory theatre in Northern Ireland is more absurd than anywhere else in both UK and EU. We are bound by EU food legislation, even though we're part of the UK, that they are able to diverge from. Now, the upshot of this is that a herbal supplement that's legal in London, Edinburgh, and Dublin might be illegal here in Belfast purely because of an invisible regulatory line. And it leaves the practitioners, the consumers, in limbo, facing threat of enforcement and then selling or even possessing products that are legal somewhere else in the UK. Who loses? Everyone, but not the corporates. Now, the patients mean they are losing access to safe and effective and sometimes essential botanicals. Practitioners are facing threats over their livelihoods and their professional autonomy. Small businesses are being priced out of their market entirely, and the public are being denied the choice of anything to take responsibility for their own health. If I want to eat it because it's good for me, I should be allowed to eat it because it's good for me. The tradition versus evidence and the common sense is just being ignored. We have centuries of safe use, documented use, but that's deemed irrelevant for the sake of clinical research, and it's getting dismissed. And the only thing that matters is whether a food or a herb was significantly consumed before 1997 in the EU. Now, this is a system that puts paperwork above people. What a surprise. And perhaps the process is put above and ahead of any kind of real world evidence that we might have. So whilst Northern Ireland faces a sharp consequence of this chilling effect, it's going to be felt across the UK and the EU because British herbalists are being cut off from the EU markets unless they can pay the same costs. EU consumers can see their choices shrink as small producers disappear, and the diversity of herbal and functional foods are being eroded, replaced by a handful of approved products from large corporations. So it's time for sense, not nonsense. And we need to call it for what it is, a regulatory farce that undermines public health, practitioner experience, and the right to self-care. We need a system that protects consumers from genuine risks, but also respects tradition-based evidence. And we need to have the real needs of people met, not just corporate interests and bureaucratic process. You can tell I'm a little bit riled. And it's devastating news for companies such as Foreshore or British Supplements here in Northern Ireland. As a member of the National Institute for Medical Herbalists, practitioners are actually authorized to prescribe herbal medicines under Clause 241 of the Human Medicines Regulations 2012. Now, that legislative framework allows for the use of medicinal herbs, such as turkey tail and cordyceps, to be used in clinical practice, provided that they are used within the scope of the regulations, most notably following a consultation. So here's the caveat, guys, and this is the way to circumnavigate the legislation. If you're able to come into the shop and give me your name, your address, your date of birth, and I have you on a database, then I am able to give you those mushrooms as a food supplement or prescribe it to you following the consultation. Similarly, if you wanted to book an online Zoom for 5 minutes for me to get those informations in that detail and make sure there's no contraindications, then I can dispense turkey tail and cordyceps and any of the other novel foods that are coming, because we would be able to prescribe it following a consultation. Does seem perverse, but it is a way to circumnavigate this. Now, the FSA's regulations concerning novel foods do not impact the ability of NIM members to prescribe these mushrooms in their practice. However, we are not allowed to sell them directly via websites or market stalls where a formal consultation does not occur. So for that, you would need to have a novel food license, and we've already talked about how prohibitive that might be. This is the state of things for us here in Northern Ireland. They've gone after a couple of companies because of advertising and saying that these mushrooms were good for your health. And because of those medical claims, it now means bureaucrats everywhere are trying to clamp down on food supplements and suppliers around the UK. It will be worse if you're in Northern Ireland because then you're under EU legislation as well. But regardless, this is bureaucrats who are clamping down our ability to go and look after our own health with what nature has given us. How dare they? And Starmer is allowing our governments to implement bureaucratic nonsense that cripple business, cripple enterprise, and stop us from staying well. So much for giving our taxes to the NHS. Starmer is not for business. We need to find ways around the loopholes. We need to find ways to navigate the legislation, and it does require you to get into the detail. It's actually beginning to know the legislation better than the bureaucrats who are trying to implement it. That's it for now. Hopefully you'll stay well and that you'll be able to get access to those mushrooms in the UK. Cheers. Take it easy.